All right, well, welcome back. So let's go ahead and pick this up on page number 33 in your handout. So if you remember, during the last lesson, we talked about bill of materials. We talked a little bit about the management of bill of materials. We referenced literature coming out of the Army G4 and headquarters, DA. And we made a determination as to whether or not a bill of materials existed within the system. And then from there, we progressed into a simple process by which we would produce documentation. So now my point is this. It was at that point when I said, hey, GCSS Army considers the major end item to be complete. So now on the top of page 33, because we're talking about the management of component shortages, the only way that the system knows that the major end item has shortages is when we now go in and exercise the work order process. And the work order process that we're exercising in our supply rooms is almost like the work order process that we would exercise in our maintenance facilities. We have what's called an order type. So it's going to be a property book work order coming out of supply. It's going to be a preventive maintenance work order coming out of your maintenance facility. So that's one of the differences between the different work orders. All right, so ultimately what you would want to know as a commander is what work orders have been created. Hey, can you show me a list of all of those work orders that are outstanding? Hey, can we go through some sort of analysis to ultimately determine the components that are tied to those work orders? Hey, what about the dollar value associated with all component shortages? Again, as a commander, you're asking if those capabilities exist within the confines of the system, and the answer is absolutely yes. And that's really what I intend to do in this lesson, is to take you through the processes that I'm describing. Now, there's two scenarios that are in the handout. One scenario relevant to what's happening at the company level. Scenario number two is relevant to what's happening at the storage location level. However, within the confines of this lesson, I'm not going to cover scenario number two. The methodology is the same, but the only problem is there's an extensive lag in the system when trying to complete scenario number two. And I just think it's going to make the lesson a little bit harder to watch, if you will. So I'm just trying to save you from some of that pain. All right, so just verbiage up at the top. So commanders, you want to verify down at the bottom. In addition, it's imperative that the dollar value be associated with all component shortages is determined. Hey, best business practices. What does that look like? What's the battle rhythm coming out of your supply room? The steps that I'm getting ready to execute is something that I think you should do monthly. I think you should archive all of these reports. I think you should make all of these reports available to your higher headquarters. Hey, likewise, if you're now serving as ES4, understand you have the ability to pull the reports on your own. And I think you're going to be in a much better position to kind of manage what's happening in every one of those companies under your operational control. All right, having said that, so I'm getting ready to go into our very first transaction code. And based on scenario one, you can see that transaction code is IW39. All right, so I'm not necessarily showing you how a work order is created, but we'll definitely analyze a work order, and I'll pull out the high points at that point in time. The transaction code IW39 is going to allow us to create a list, okay, of what it is that we actually have that's outstanding. Middle of page 33, look at step number one. So I'm going to go to the order type field, and I'm going to type PB01. And from there, I'm going to go down to the main work center. And I recognize that the main work center includes the UIC, or that's the information that we would place in that field. I'm going to leverage the UIC that's in the handout, so Whiskey Delta 82 Alpha 0. And I'm going to remove the from in the period field. And from there, what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down to the others section. Now, changing the layout in the others section is critical, because if that layout is not changed, the report's not going to yield any result. So you can see here the layout that I'm going to choose, IW39 PB01, and then I'm going to execute. All right, so now I look at page number 34. So in essence, what we're doing is we're looking at a list of all of the work orders that are outstanding. And again, we're doing this based on a company or based on all work orders for the company, should I say. So now what I want to do is I want to deviate a little bit from the handout. So I'm looking at a work order, equipment description, PAS 13 Echo. The order number is here. Top of page number 34 says above is a list of all outstanding work orders for the company. However, this report does not include a list of all components associated with those work orders. So in essence, what you would have to do is you would have to drill down into the work order. All right, so now if I look down at the bottom here, you see where I'm pointing. I have actually drilled down into another transaction code. I started in IW39 and I ended up in IW33. In both cases, I'm just looking at a list. I can click on the Components tab and I can see right now, so I'm just showing you, reality with some of the issues that we have with these work orders. There's no components identified as short. So why is there a work order established for that piece of equipment? Okay, I'm going to hit the back arrow. Let me just look at another work order for this antenna. So I'm going to double click on the order number. I go back to the Components tab, and I can see that there are 3 components that are identified as short. So now what I want to do is I want to look at the components themselves, and I want to see what the state or what type of state they're in. And I'm going to scroll to the right here, and I'm going to look at a column called the Reservation Purchase Request column. So typically what happens as a default setting, when a supply sergeant or someone in your supply room creates that work order, it initially defaults to never. So that means when it says never, that means that component in and of itself is now in a deferred state. Okay, just because the work order has been created doesn't mean that those shortages are automatically placed on order. So never becomes the default setting, and we're going to use the term deferred. I say once money becomes available, now your supply folks would go back into the work order and they would begin to release those reservations. So in this case, everything is set to immediately. We would have to go to other reports within the system to ultimately determine whether or not those items are actually on order. So I guess ultimately what I'm trying to do here is just to go in and just show you, hey, for this particular work order, we have 3 components identified as short, and then we can go to the Reservation Purchase Request column and we can see the state of those components. I say again, before I move on, we would have to go to other reports in GRME to determine whether or not those items are sitting out there on a valid requisition. All right, so again, top of page number 34, I'm just looking at a list of all the work orders. If I want to see the components, I'm going to have to drill down to each work order independently. Okay, so now here's the goal. 1 truck, 1 work order. I've discovered, based on my analysis over the years, we have 1 truck with 5 work orders. That's not the way that we manage property book work orders. 1 truck, 1 work order. Now, if we have duplicate work orders, ultimately what's going to happen is the dollar value associated with those shortages is now going to be skewed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the report that I'm looking at, and you can see step number 6 here. I'm going to right click on the report. I'm going to choose spreadsheet. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this spreadsheet to my desktop. I'll just call it work orders. And then once that spreadsheet opens, what I'm going to do is I'm going to target the equipment column, and then I'm going to go through a process by which I incorporate a conditional format, and we'll allow that conditional format to determine whether or not there are any duplicates. All right, so we're waiting for the Excel file to open. Okay, I can see here the equipment column, column Juliet. And now the handout, step number 8 is saying, go to the equipment column, highlight the first equipment number, which I have. I go to page 35, top of page number 35, step 9, Control Shift and the down arrow, which in turn highlights all of the equipment records in that column. And then I go up top here, conditional formatting, highlight cell rules. I arrow over and down to duplicate values. And now those duplicate values are in red. So in essence, what I'm looking at, and I'm going to highlight 2 records here. So let's see, I'll highlight these 2 records. So in essence, I have a trailer. Here's the equipment number, but now I have 2 work orders. One work order ending in 1598, one work order ending in 4107. Hey, again, I want to remind you of the goal. 1 trailer, 1 work order. So now there's a discovery that's been made, and this is going to have to be cleaned up. So what you could see your supply folks doing is opening up each work order independently and ultimately figuring out what they need to do to merge those work orders together. Or maybe in some cases, if we have equipment, or should I say components that are in a deferred state, then the easiest thing to do is just to close that work order as a do not execute. So that part of the reconciliation process is going to be a little bit complex, but it definitely is something that needs to be done going forward. All right, so now if you look at the bottom of page number 35, we're going to get away from the Excel file. And then now back in the application, what we're going to do is we're going to progress to another transaction code called IWBK. Now I want to make sure my delivery is easy to understand in the sense that IW39 allowed us to create a report that includes all of the work orders. In order to see the components associated with those work orders, we'd have to drill down independently. However, if we leverage transaction code IWBK, so look at the command field, I'm going to type /November, IWBK, and I'm going to press enter. This is the report that we're going to utilize that's going to show us all components associated with those work orders. All right, so I'm looking at page number 36. In the order type field, I'm going to type PB01. And I'm going to come down to the main work center. Again, anytime I see main work center, it's equal to our UIC. So I'm going to type Whiskey Delta 8 to Alpha 0. And then I'm going to execute. Now, potentially there's some work orders that appear, and without being overly technical, these work orders are appearing by virtue of the fact that they haven't been released in the system. So the way the system works, if the work orders are created but they are not released, the system is not going to take them through what they call an availability check, meaning the system's not going to determine whether or not the components that are short are actually on hand at the unit. So here, all we're going to do is just choose continue. Now, as we're waiting for the report to populate, we have the ability within the confines of the report to look at different data elements. For example, top of page 37, we can see things like the cost, the acquisition advice code. We can see the accounting requirement code. Is it expendable? Is it durable? Is it not expendable? And then the traffic lights. Now, the traffic lights, I can explain to you what the traffic lights mean, but I would say to you, you really have to work a little harder to try your best to interpret exactly what's happening. And I'll show you what I mean when I say that. I'm looking at a red traffic light. So top of page 37, hey, red indicates that the material is not available. Hey, I'm looking at a green traffic light down here. There's 2 of them. And now green says indicates the material is available to issue or it has been issued. So again, as I'm creating the report, it's taking all of the components that are short and trying to determine whether or not those components are available. All right, so green, either it has been issued or it's available for issue. And this is how you would make that determination. So I'll highlight this first record here. So now this item has already been issued. I know that by virtue of the fact that there's a quantity in the withdrawal column. So that's signifying that it already has been issued. The next work order here that I highlight, now nothing has been issued, but there is something in the unit's supply provisions to issue. So there's going to be a lesson toward the end here that talks about the management of supply provisions, and we'll talk about right versus wrong and the correct way to do things within the system. And I'm going to show you a provisional storage location for supply, and you're going to see that there's going to be a lot of components that are on that provisional storage location. And then we're going to talk about really what should be in that supply room and the reconciliation process that we can go through to clean that stuff up. All right, so outside of the traffic lights, the next thing that I want to do is I'm going to change the layout because, hey, I can see that there's a standard price and a cost within the report itself, but rather than totaling out all of the work orders, I want to create separation and I want to create a subtotal, if you will. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to select layout. The layout that we're going to select is a US PB01. Okay, so now I'm looking at the separation between those work orders. Hey, I'm scrolling all the way down to the bottom here. It looks like the total dollar value for component shortages, $127,000. I can see one work order right here. Work order number, let me see if that's expanded. So work order ending in 8868. I can see that there are two components that are short, and the value of that work order is $16.12. So once again, what are your best business practices? Hey, what battle rhythm is being utilized in your supply room? What I advocate and recommend to you, have your folks do this monthly. Hey, you're going to create a start point as a result of your initial change of command inventory. But as you progress beyond that, hey, what do we look like in the month of June? What do we look like in the month of July? And you create that timeline. In the previous lesson, we talked about the change report for these bill of materials. So now I say you're going to be in a much better place because month after month after month, you can see and have documented that progression. All right, so basically, IWBK is also the transaction code that's utilized when items come into the warehouse. They're receipted into the provisional storage location and supply, and then they're issued through this particular process. So for example, let's imagine this padlock set was available for issue. Supply would do nothing more than highlight it. They're going to click on this goods movement here, and ultimately what it's going to do is it's going to issue the item back to the work order. The components will remain on this report until all components relevant to that work order have been issued and that work order is technically closed. So understand, we're going to see things that have been withdrawn until we reach a point of having every shortage on that one work order satisfied. Now, as I look at page number 38, I'm not necessarily going to go through the process by which I export this information to Excel. I think you all understand the Excel capability. I don't think it's necessary to do it at that point in time. However, if you look at page number 39, be mindful of scenario number 2 and just know that there is a process in place whereby we can make that same determination at the storage location level. So this is my thought process. Hey, as a commander, you should know all work orders and you should know the dollar value associated with all component shortages company-wide. Hey, if you have a platoon leader that's a sub-hand receipt holder, in addition to, they should know all work orders for their platoon. They should know the dollar value of all component shortages for their platoon so they can go through the same progression that you would go through. So once again, what do your best business practices say and how are certain things being executed within your unit? All right, so let's pick this up on page number 43. So now I want to talk about documentation. So there was a comment in the Army G4 newsletter down toward the bottom that talked about the document that replaces the legacy shortage annex, something called a 2020 material issue slip. And that's really what I'm attempting to do here, beginning on page 43, is to tell you or show you how your supply folks would actually create these documents. So as I read on page 43 here, as commanders ensure that either the material issue slip or the DA 5990 Echo maintenance request is produced for all outstanding work orders as proof. So the Army G4 newsletter says, hey, let's side with that material issue slip, even though I'll show you how both documents are produced. And you can see that in bold. Now, understand the note here right above the image says steps shown below are for informational purposes and are completed by supply personnel. So in supply, like at the property book level, they have access to a menu. So if you look here, and let's imagine I'm the supply sergeant. So step number 1 from the supply menu, I'm going to go to component management. And within the confines of component management, I'm coming down and I'm clicking on IW38. Okay, IW38, what I'm going to do is IW38 is just like IW39. I'm going to put the UIC in the main work center here, and I'll use the UIC in the handout, Whiskey Echo 35 Alpha 0. Okay, I'm going to remove the from in the period field. Okay, I'm going to scroll down to the other section. And in the other section, I'm going to change that layout once again to the IW39 PB01. And then from there, I'm going to execute. So once again, what's going to happen is now I have a list of all of the work orders for the company. In this case, I'm only looking at one work order. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on that work order. Okay, so I'm on page 45, step number 6. I can double click on that order number. I can look at the components tab. I can see all of the components that are identified as short. Okay, I can see the state of those shortages. Look here in the reservation purchase request column, they're all set to immediately. Once again, I'd have to go to other reports in GArmy to ultimately figure out whether or not those items are on a valid requisition. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically on page number 46, I'm going to go to the top of the screen. So step number 7, page 46, top of the screen, I go order, I come to print, and I go print order. All right, so that first document that the Army G4 newsletter references is that 2020 material issue slip. I choose print preview. Hey, here's what that document looks like. And once again, the Army G4 says this is the document that's going to replace the legacy shortage annex. Now, from there on page number 47, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click the back arrow. And then I'm going to choose print preview for a second time. And now the very next document that I'm looking at is that 5990 Echo. Therein lies that maintenance request. So in summary, as I bring this particular lesson to a close, we understand that component shortages are managed through a work order process. Again, it's a property book work order. As company commanders, you would want to know all work orders that are outstanding in your unit. Hey, likewise, I say you would want to know that very same thing as ES4. However, that one list that we produce, it's not going to reveal to you all components associated with those work orders. Again, you can drill down, but you have to go elsewhere to get a single report that shows them. So that takes us from IW39 into IWBK. We call that the workbench. Hey, in IWBK, I can change the layout. So now all of those work orders are subtotaled. I can see the state of each one of those components based on the traffic lights and what those traffic lights indicate. And then finally, from a documentation perspective, once again, the Army G4 says, we're going to utilize that 2020 material issue slip as that single document that's going to replace that legacy shortage annex. So in closing, I can't emphasize enough how important it is that you look at your best business practices as a commander. Okay, what battle rhythms do we currently have in place in our supply rooms? So in the end, you're producing, or your folks are producing the necessary reports, on a more frequent basis, and those reports are archived for historical purposes. So once again, I hope you see the benefit in this particular lesson. We're getting near the end here. I think we are going to talk management of supply provisions, and then we'll kind of bring this to a close, talking about change of command inventories and that supply sergeant initial counseling. So you guys take care, and we'll be back together soon.